We have terrorists who have pledged allegiance to global terrorist organizations like Al-Qaeda, like IS, and other groups. We have governments that are military and placing regime protection above national security because they've staged a coup, and in the coup, the staging of the coup is always divisive because you have a section of the military staging the coup, even against the wishes of some other people in the military.
On this episode of Panel 54, we are looking at a region where the security map keeps shifting faster than the political map can actually respond. Across the Sahel and parts of West Africa, violence is no longer confined to one border, one group, or one explanation. It is moving through insurgencies, military takeovers, illicit economies, foreign security partnerships, local grievances, and communities that are left often calculating survival for themselves. According to the Africa Centre for Strategic Studies, published on 18 February 2025, the Sahel remained Africa's deadliest theatre of militant Islamist violence in 2024. The same analysis noted that Burkina Faso accounted for 61% of militant Islamist-related fatalities in the Sahel, while Niger recorded a 66% increase after the 2023 coup. From Cairo to Cape Town, Lagos to Lamu, 54 nations, one continent, countless perspectives. Hi, I'm Waweru Njoroge. Welcome to Panel 54, a global perspective through an African lens. This is the podcast where we unpack power, policy, people, and the paradoxes that define our time. With nuance, with history, and with a deliberate commitment to context. This isn't punditry, it's perspective. It's not a briefing, it's a reframing, and it starts right here. To help us make sense of this, I'm joined by Fidel Amakye Owusu, a Ghanaian geopolitical and security analyst specializing in African geopolitics, conflict, and development. He is the founder and CEO of DefSec Analytics Africa Limited, serves as security advisor for Africa to the Unival Group, and is also a non-resident expert with geopolitical intelligence services. So thank you so much for joining us on Panel 54. As we like to say, Karibu Sana.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right. So, but before we get into things like the Sahel, the coups, armed groups, and foreign actors, I want to start with the person who does the actual analysis, right?
Yes.
So, Fidel. First of all, let's start with the name Fidel.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
It's not a typical Ghanaian name.
Yes. In Ghana, we give Christian names, and then your surname, and then there's also a third name, the person you are named after.
Right.
So, my name is Fidel Amakye Owusu. The Fidel, interestingly, is the most popular Fidel in the world. The late Cuban leader, Fidel Castro. In the 80s, my father, fell in love with him in terms of politically.
Okay.
And I think ideologically, because he was more of a leftist.
Right.
And he also supported Ghana a lot in the health sector, the famous Cuban doctors. And how they supported Ghana in our difficult times. So my father decided to name me Fidel directly after him.
Okay.
Yes.
Cool.
So that was the intention. And then the Amakye happens to be my great-grandfather's name. And then the Owusu is my surname.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. No problem. So now you specialize in geopolitics, you specialize in conflicts and security in Africa.
Yes, sir.
Right. For someone outside of that world, somebody like me, for example, what does that actually mean day to day? You know, what are you looking at? What are you listening for? And how do you separate the noise from the actual signals?
Yes, a lot is happening on the continent. And at DefSec, where I head, I'm the chief executive officer, we look at all the 6 geopolitical zones: Horn of Africa, East Africa, Central Africa, Southern Africa, West Africa, and North Africa. And we are dealing with the continent with the largest number of countries. That is 54 countries, sovereign countries, and 55 because sometimes Western Sahara, depending on who is speaking.
Yeah.
And because of that, and we do a lot on transnational crimes like terrorism, like drug trafficking, like arms trafficking, and the other threats that you can think of. And we also look at the vertical, that is internal politics within countries and how they affect the geopolitics of the regions.
Right.
And so the decisions that are made in Mogadishu are likely to affect Kenya, because you talk of Al-Shabaab, you talk of other threats in Horn of Africa. So we do same in West Africa. You're talking about the rise of terrorism. You're talking about how transnational crime has worsened over time because of porous borders and all that.
Okay.
Yes, so
Okay.
that's what we do.
We'll touch on the porous borders, right? But I'm looking at the Sahel. I want to focus right now on the Sahel. We know it's been unstable for a couple of years. But does the current phase, at least in terms of the reading between the lines, the current phase seems to be wider, it seems to be harder, and seems to be more politically charged, right?
Yes, sir.
So across North and West Africa, what has actually changed, right? Are we seeing the same insecurity getting worse? Or has the region entered a new phase of terms, both geographic spread and depth inside the communities, institutions, and actual local economies?
Yeah. So apart from the 6 island states that we have in Africa, majority of the states are found in a landmass, so that is the continental Africa. This means the various borders and their porosity ensures that what happens in one country affects the other.
Yeah.
So if you talk of terrorism, you're talking of Algeria in early 2000s, where after the Algerian civil war, the remnants of the Islamists that did not support the peace process decided to retreat southward. And southward means northern Mali. So they retreated south of Nigeria. It means northern Mali, closer to northern Mali. Now, this group were radicals. And so eventually they found their people, same-minded guys across the border in northern Mali.
Yeah.
And so that started what we call AKIM, Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb. And they eventually swore allegiance to Al-Qaeda after September 11th. And so we found that terror group having a foothold in Africa and Western Africa. And eventually, when Gaddafi's regime fell, we saw the proliferation of arms. Horizontal proliferation, moving across countries. And that meant that these guys then came to get access to relatively sophisticated weapons.
Right.
And that also happened concurrently with Tuareg insurrection. The Tuareg have been there for a long time, and they've asked for autonomy or independence. Often this fell on deaf ears. And over time, this struggle has been armed. And at the time when Gaddafi fell, they also got these arms and the onslaught started. And that was what we saw in 2012 and 2013 when there was the capture of Timbuktu, the ancient city of in Mali, where we have one of the oldest universities in the world located. And they destroyed a lot of traditional artifacts and historical centers and all that. And it took the intervention of African forces to stop that.
Yes.
When this operation started, we had Operation Serval, led by France with air support, and then Barkhane. Barkhane was supposed to create stability and lead to what we call talks that allowed some autonomy for the Tuareg. But eventually, we didn't see much from that. And then we saw the terrorists come back. And eventually, this is what we see.
Yeah.
Al-Qaeda affiliate known as the JNIM, literally translated as Movement for the Protection of Islams and Muslims. So it means if you had Muslims in your country, whether they invite them or not, they were protecting them. That is dangerous for all countries, including the core countries of Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. So that's where we are. And we've also found IS groups that often came from these groups, and they have become more ferocious because IS believes in indiscriminate attacks. And the more you attack, the more your group is going to be given recognition. So we have IS in the Sahel, and then we have IS in the West African province, that is in the Lake Chad Basin, currently having a hard time from US strikes in northeastern Nigeria.
Okay, so now if I was to transpose from, okay, fine, that's what has happened, this is a transition that has come. What is the mood inside governments and regional forces that are trying to actually fight back, right? Are they adapting? Are they overstretched? Are they frustrated? Are they more confident, or simply running behind the pace of the threat?
Yeah, that's an important question because we've had shades or some nuances in terms of the response to the fight or your response with the fight and terrorism. One, we have military regimes. We have democratically elected leaders. Then we have countries where you consider to be weak in terms of institutional weakness. I mean, the military and everything, they just came out from some trouble of some sort, and then they are not ready to really fight for themselves. Now, ECOWAS is currently facing what we call I see as an unprecedented schism. Ever since the organization was created in 1975, we've never had this kind of division. But after the Niger coup that happened in 2023, and before that coup, we've had earlier ones in Mali and Burkina Faso.
Yep.
Now, ECOWAS's response to that coup led to this schism because ECOWAS threatened to use force to reinstate the democratically elected leader who was deposed. And that did not really go down well with the military regimes. So they decided to draw them closer, and they decided to threaten to fight back. And then eventually said, well, we are leaving ECOWAS anyways, because your protocol says that whenever there is a coup, we have to reinstate it, and we don't want to follow that. And that created that schism. So which means that the kind of cooperation that West Africa had used in 2012, 2013 is lacking today. And that is difficult. So it means that the AES, that is the new name for the association or the alliance of Sahel countries. These are landlocked countries that have formed a kind of confederacy.
Yes.
And the coastal states. So there's that clash. Yes, there are still nuances because some countries are seen to be more hostile than others towards these groups or these confederacy. But however, I believe that in terms of the fight, the Sahel states are facing a lot of challenges. One is the sizes of their countries.
Right.
Now, if you put the three Sahel states together, it is larger than Western Europe. So Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, you put them together, and then you put the United Kingdom, Germany, Spain, Poland, all of them together, they don't match up to the size of these three countries. Which means, and you look at the budget size, it means they cannot also have huge armies. They cannot finance huge armies. So it means they are overstretched. They cannot control all these territories by themselves. So they have been reduced to protecting cities and settlements, especially the capital, where they control. And because they are also in this schism with the rest of ECOWAS, the security cooperation that is needed, that was used in stabilizing Liberia when the civil war started or had devastated the country in the early 2000s. And what was used in stabilizing Sierra Leone is lacking currently.
Okay, so these groups you're talking about across the Sahel and West Africa, they're not all, well, I would like to say not all armed groups are exactly the same, you know. Some are ideological, for sure. Some are local. Some are criminal. We'll come on to the criminal element a bit later. And some will sit somewhere in between. So I'm not quite sure where they are. So who are the main armed groups across the Sahel and West Africa, and what is the real difference between them?
So I've always, when I had to train people on security analysis, I use the Laswellian definition of politics to explain the complex situation that we find ourselves in the Sahel and Africa. Harold Laswell defined politics as who gets what, when and how. That's, you approach it that way and it becomes simple. So who? In the Sahel, we are talking about nationalists, Tuareg nationalists who legitimately want some autonomy or some independence.
Okay.
So self-determination. We have terrorists who have pledged allegiance to global terrorist organizations like Al-Qaeda, like IS, and other groups. We have governments that are military and placing regime protection above national security because they've staged a coup, and in the coup, the staging of the coup is always divisive because you have a section of the military staging the coup, even against the wishes of some other people in the military. So regime protection has been prioritized over national security.
Okay.
So as long as they survive, national security comes second. And we've seen it. And as the discussion goes on, I'll give examples that depicts that. Then we have regional actors like ECOWAS, a regional organization that has been robust until now, And then we have individual actors, the leaders involved.
Yeah.
So currently we have Sierra Leonean president being the ECOWAS chairman. His role currently, his kind of rapprochement that is trying to bring the Sahel countries closer to coastal West Africa. And then we have powerful countries and the leaders therein, like Nigeria, Ahmed Tinubu.
Yeah.
He has a lot of weight in the region. We have Ghana. In terms of diplomacy, Ghana is more like a top country in West Africa. And then we have Senegal, currently experiencing some internal political turmoil, but also very consequential because a lot of what Mali gets from the outside comes through Senegal. So this is also very important. And then international actors.
Yes.
The United Nations, because Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso are all member states, and they need to really, and how international forces or UN forces were asked to leave Mali because of some of these issues that I've raised earlier.
Okay. I want to focus on the word terrorist in the whole bigger scheme of things. So we've done the who, what, when. So we're looking at aspects of government. There's aspects of territorial control. There's aspects of money extraction. There's the religious aspect as well. And some of them is just arms trading is good business. Why would you want to cut off the hand that feeds you? But is there a danger that governments use the word terrorists so broadly that they stop understanding the local logic of each actual group?
So back in 2022, I wrote an article and I said the way Mali was approaching the Tuareg nationalists was not the best, because most of these Ansar Dine, there's a group called Ansar Dine that was part of Akim when they were attacking cities in central Mali in 2012, 2013. Now Ansar Dine is made up of Tuaregs. So that is the radical Tuaregs that have moved from the nationalist agenda to terrorism. Now, currently in Mali, the two groups are put together and called terrorists. Now, what it means is that who do you speak to? Because you label me terrorist and I might not be willing to speak with you because, I don't find any common ground. So you call me terrorist. Now, at a time when, after 2012, 2013, there were moderate Tuaregs that did not want to have anything with the extremists. Then, eventually, the military junta unilaterally left what we call the OGS talks, the talks between the nationalists, the Tuareg nationalists, and the government in Bamako. They said, no, it's not necessary, and then they left. Now, after leaving, the moderates are now have gotten closer. And the recent attack on Bamako, the two sides joined forces to attack Bamako. So you can just imagine. This question is very important to know how to differentiate, because it's always convenient to put all the groups together and call them terrorists so you can use force. Monopoly over the use of force, so to speak. But then the extremists are showing that the state does not have that monopoly in practice. They can also use force. And when you have such situation, it is always good to differentiate the radicals from the moderates and perhaps speak with the moderates.
Okay, so if these groups operate so differently, it also means that their messaging also operates differently. Where I'm going with this is the fact that violence is physical, that we know. But influence is also digital. And we see how the world is going in terms of digital. So how are things like cheap communication tools, right? Things like drones, encrypted messaging, right? And social media actually changing the way these groups have been operating.
So recently, after the Bamako attack, there were videos that were released by the extremists, and I was sharing some of them, like what they intend to do and what we can do. And one of them had their badges and some of their writings in Arabic. And when I posted it a short while, Facebook took it off.
Okay.
So I thought that it was good. Yes, I could not read that Arabic, but Facebook thought that it displayed terror propaganda. Yes, and I thought it was very good. Now, it means that social media is trying to police
Right.
the dissemination of some of this information. But these guys always have a way of disseminating. Currently in Africa, we are very vulnerable to disinformation. And the more people think they have the right information, the worse they actually are, because, it comes in a way that speaks your language. So terrorists will come to northern Ghana and tell you, well, if you are not having potable water, the reason may be that those in Accra do not care about you, but we do.
Yeah.
And they may sink some borehole for you. So in a way, after you get that potable water from them, any other thing they say will seem right. So these are some of the things that they do. In Somalia, I've seen terrorists trying to say, no, we want to discard polythene. We don't want polythene in our territory. And that propaganda is heavy. Because then, well, if these guys are bad, why are they trying to keep the place clean?
Yeah.
And it can really do a lot of damage. Because then you see them in that light.
So would you say
and they're conscious of that.
So would you say we're underestimating propaganda as a natural battlefield?
That is it.
Yeah.
And it's the way we go about things. Like we often want our wishes to be expressed by others for us. So when the propagandist knows that you really hate your brother from the other side of the border, so he started propaganda with that, and you fall for it.
We need to have a separate conversation about disinformation and misinformation, because that's something that's very close to me. Right now, I want to this. You mentioned this a bit earlier. So since 2020, is Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger have had successful coups. 5 successful coups between them, right? That has actually changed not only who governs, but it also now talks to the aspect of security, sovereignty, regional cooperation as well. And how that is all now being argued, right? Yeah. So how have the coups changed the security picture in the Sahel? Have military governments improved security, or mainly changed the political language around sovereignty?
That's a good question, because when these coups started, the premise or the pretext was, well, the civilian governments are not providing security.
No.
And we are the soldiers. We are the front lines. We understand what is happening, and we are going to provide security. In fact, the populations received this in good faith. Because, yes, they are the soldiers. Yes, these guys could reach Bamako. And the civilians are not doing much. The UN forces are more neutral, because their mandate does not allow them to engage in offensives unless they are threatened. So then the thing was, the military will be the best. Now, after 2-3 years, the situation is actually the worst. And yes, you find a lot of people disputing this, but we see what is happening. Bamako was almost taken. It was, the defense minister was killed.
Yeah.
So it has not been the best. Burkina Faso, yes, the young man there is implementing some policies that are progressive, that's developmental, but the security situation is worse off than he came to meet it. That is the situation. And one thing is, there's a way Ghanaians say this: is when you have a sore on your leg and you deny it, it's going to rot eventually.
Yeah.
But when you have to accept it in order to treat it, you have to accept that you have it. So in this case, propaganda does not work.
Yeah.
You need to open your doors for help. And in this case, from what I know, the Burkinabe forces have been cooperating with their counterpart in Ghana in order to check some of these security things. Because, in Africa, we have theoretically hard borders, but practically porous.
Yes, yeah.
So when the terrorist attacks, he then crosses to the other side, and you cannot chase him because you need a lot of diplomatic and protocols to follow in order to get there, by which time he would have escaped. So how are we going to have these military governments and their civilian counterpart that they do not even share a regional organization with to agree to have some of these things? So the military government, yes, they promised, and perhaps they were sure that we were going to provide some security. The example in Mali was when the military government, the first coup was 2020, and then there was a lot of pressure. So there was power sharing between civilians and the military. So we had a ceremonial president who was a civilian, and then the coup leader became the vice president. Eventually, in 2021, they could not just it's like mixing oil and water.
Yeah.
I mean, no matter how you shook it, when the bottle settled, you find how things will go. So the consolidated power, and then the next thing was to ask the UN to limit where they could go.
Yeah.
The UN forces. And Russian Wagner was brought in. Now, when Wagner was brought in, my reaction as an analyst was that Wagner, as far as terrorism is concerned, does not have that experience. The first time we saw Wagner was in Ukraine, Eastern Ukraine, when Crimea was taken. And that was more of a geopolitical move than a counter-terrorism move. So how is Wagner going to do this? This is more of Wagner was present to protect the regimes rather than to fight terrorism.
Yeah.
Many people disagreed with me at the time. Currently, as I speak, even Mali admits that, I mean, it's not the best.
Okay.
And from the taking of Kidal, the British in Bamako, and the killing of the defense minister and all that, in the presence of Wagner, which is currently African core. Because, I mean, Prigozhin is no more. And so, you know, that's the situation, and it's a sad one.
Now, speaking about Wagner, we can see that France has drawn down on being pushed out of much of the Sahel, right?
Yeah.
While Russian-linked security support has gained influence.
Yes, of course.
Right? So from a security outcome perspective, what has actually changed on the ground?
Yes, so that's a good follow-up because the thing is, they were brought in to help survey the situation.
Yes.
Now the statistics show that the Sahel is the epicenter of global terrorism. When Wagner got there, we didn't have that situation.
No.
But now we have it. So, I mean, the data will speak for itself.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes, you know, the story in Africa is that many youth in Africa do not want to be associated with former colonial masters. They feel that, well, there was colonialism, and so we don't still need them. And sometimes they may be very right because, I mean, the post-colonial experiment has not been too good. Some countries are doing well, others are not. And France, for instance, has been targeted a lot. However, in terms of security, and security is such that it doesn't know ideology.
No.
You know, when the bomb is thrown, the bomb will not decide on the socialist or the capitalist. Is going to go where it is directed and kill people.
Yeah.
And innocent people. Recently, a woman was interviewed in Bamako and he said, well, we are scared. We shouldn't be pretentious about it.
Yeah.
We are scared. Because these guys were able to reach the outskirts of Bamako.
And that's a reality in the ground.
That is a reality.
Yeah.
So, Wagner's presence, I mean, in Kidal, they were in Kidal with all the weapons that we know Russians can produce.
Yeah.
And they actually negotiated with the extremists to retreat and leave the city for them. That doesn't show a force that can neutralize the terror threat. In the end, these are facts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In the light of that, then, is there still a credible regional leader in the fight against terrorism in the Sahel? As in somebody who can step in that vacuum that's been created? Or is the region just become too fragmented?
Yes, the fragmentation is very critical because, I mean, whether we like it or not, the AES countries are not part of ECOWAS. So there's no synchrony in terms of decisions. But, you know, the natural leader is supposed to be the largest economy, the most popular country, I mean, in terms of population, and the largest military, which is Nigeria. But unfortunately, from what we see in northern Nigeria, it doesn't show that Nigeria has a lot of security credibility to help others in the region. It needs to put its house or its home together, and before it can really step out there. Yes, ECOWAS forces will not be deployed in Nigeria because Nigeria has, I mean, if you're talking of deployment of ECOWAS forces in Nigeria, is going to take and they have the problem. So they have a lot to do. Now, you come to the next country is Ghana. And Ghana also has its limits. Recently, Ghana is stepping up with expanding its military. The president, there was a recent recruitment. The president said it should be doubled because, I mean, we would need that. And partially, or as part of the problem, they are considering the kind of threat that these extremists pose to us and how we should be ready for them. But to what extent can we go? You know, you go to Cote d'Ivoire, the next economy, the third largest economy, and Cote d'Ivoire is very good in terms of intelligence and all that.
Yes.
After the Grand Bassam attacks, somewhere in the 2016, 2014, thereabout.
Yeah.
They've had a lot of security beef up, and despite experiencing 2 civil wars, they are now robustly to protect their territory. But Mali is not really in good terms with Cote d'Ivoire, and another neighboring country is Burkina Faso. They are not really in good terms. And then how do you cooperate to fight this? So there's no definite leader. But then there's another aspect of this.
Yes.
North Africa. Mali, Burkina Faso, Mali and Niger do not only share boundaries with West African, ECOWAS countries. They also share boundaries with non-ECOWAS countries.
Yeah.
And one of them is Algeria. Algeria happens to have one of the most robust militaries in Africa. And Mali has a lot of diplomatic tensions with Algeria because of, the unilateral exit of the Algiers stock by Bamako and other issues.
Yeah.
And there were drones that were shot down by Algeria because they thought it had reached.
Yeah.
These are things that, and Mauritania as well. Mauritania used to be part of ECOWAS until 2000, but it did not live in that divorce was not a hard divorce. It was a cool one because they saw themselves more as North Africans and more Islamic. So they joined the Organization of Islamic Countries instead. Yeah. So these are the issues.
I want to pull the thread slightly on that security partnerships, basically. So not all external security partnerships play out the same way.
Yeah,
and as you just demonstrated. Yeah,
of course.
Now, Nigeria's relationship with the United States gives a different model to actually now, if we were to examine that aspect. So in a region where some foreign security partnerships have become politically toxic,
yes, sir,
or operationally disappointing, yes, as you just said, why does the US-Nigeria security relationship appear to have actually remained more useful and more durable?
Yeah, so Nigeria is a global player in terms of oil production, and its output into the global market is part of the reasons the international prices of oil will either stabilize or be disrupted.
Yeah.
So it's a huge, country when it comes to oil politics, OPEC and all that. Apart from that, it is the largest or the most populated country in Africa.
Yes.
So whatever is happening there is reflective of perhaps the continental story. Again, Nigeria is the third largest economy currently after South Africa and Egypt, Nigeria comes. And that is significant. There are a lot of investment from all around the world. There are companies that are into oil industry. That could be US companies, Western companies, and other companies. So yes, in general, the United States has a legitimate interest in making sure to place it. But there's another aspect that has been very interesting. President Trump's interest in protecting Christians in Nigeria. Sometimes that is the communication of same is not really clear because when nomadic people shot and killed or kidnapped Christians, it was more about land than religion.
Right.
Because these are cattle rearers who happen to be Muslims.
Yeah.
And fighting sedentary farmers who happen to be Christians. So it was more of a coincidence. However, the main issue has to do with land, the land resources that is being, grazing lands and all that. Yeah, so that must be looked at. That's soft politics. It's not hard.
Yeah.
However, there are legitimate concerns for protecting Christians, and President Trump has prioritized that. And that has translated into his commitment to help the Nigerian government fight terrorism. And the recent elimination of the leader of ISWAP, Islamic State West African Province, is very significant. And the flow-up attacks, because often when the leader is eliminated, the successor becomes more aggressive.
Yes.
He wants to make statement. He wants to put fear in rivals, internal rivals, and they want to also show how effective they are in their own right.
Okay.
Yeah. So they become more. So the follow-up attacks really disrupt even the succession plan of this, and I think that is very significant. And Nigeria, in fact, this particular operation happened. It was joint force, and between Nigerian forces and the U.S. forces. But in terms of intelligence gathering, like geospatial intelligence and all that, that is very necessary for that, because you look at how Bin Laden was taken off in Abbottabad in Pakistan and all that. Some countries have relatively superior technology, and you need that to fight this.
Right.
All the same, protecting your sovereignty
Exactly.
and your territorial integrity.
Okay, so that brings me on my next question. When the United States, what they bring to the table in terms of counterterrorism, that we as African countries tend to find difficult to do on our own.
Yeah.
Which would you prioritize in terms of the most important aspect? Is it the aspect of surveillance assets, special operations, training systems, logistics, coordination culture?
Yeah.
I mean, those are just a few, but
Yeah.
in terms of what they bring that we as Africans cannot do on our own, what is it that they actually do better than us?
Yeah. So one of the first decisions that President Trump took that affected Africa was when he came to office in a few months was to order a strike in northern Somalia against IS.
Right.
And yes, US has a base in Djibouti and all that, and would like to protect it. But it was very significant because then it showed that the Trump administration, despite its more of American first policy, wants to also fight terrorism together. I mean, and that operation in Somalia was coordinated with domestic forces.
Yes.
Now, the superiority has to do with area superiority because they have more superior drones. It's more surgical in operations because in Africa recently, where government or national forces have adopted drones, it has led to some excesses where accidental killings. I mean, recently in Nigeria, about 100 people in a market and all that.
Yeah.
But when it's done by more countries with more sophisticated technology, they're able to do what we call surgical strikes, where even in the same compound, the main threat is able to be, yes, we are likely to have collateral damage.
There'll be collateral damage,
it's not as much as someone who does not have the technology. So that is very drone technology.
Okay.
The interesting thing is now the extremists are also using drones. And we know the danger in that. Perhaps we'll talk about that. But then that technology, the drone technology is very significant. Then we move to geospatial surveillance, where you're able to use satellite imagery to really zoom in on compounds that, I mean, would have these high targets to eliminate, separating that from the crowd. And then the movement of people over time and all that. And especially where we have porous borders, significant movement could be monitored. Again, the coordination culture, where, I mean, we have to do the aerial thing, and then you have to move ground forces to secure the regions. And then training. In December, last December, I was in the Silent Warrior conference where African special forces met and discussed operational and tactical progress and challenges and how to overcome them. And that was very significant because many African militaries are building special forces because of the special problem with these extremists.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned this, and I just want to pick up on this very quickly. When a targeted operation disrupts a senior militant figure, for example, like Abu Bilal al-Miniki, right? Or a command network, right? Yeah. What is a real operational value? I think you've touched on it slightly, but you've also touched on what happens when somebody like that is removed from power. Does it actually buy time? Does it degrade planning, right? Does it interrupt financing? Does it weaken morale? Or does it create space for local forces now to act?
So when the strike happened, Abu Bilal was taken off. My concern was that all regional forces, and I made that statement on LinkedIn, that all regional forces should be alert, and especially the local forces in Northeast, because there's going to be reprisal attacks. We are going to see more indiscriminate attacks because they will hit soft target to make a statement. So everything. Then I saw the follow-ups. Often decapitation has been an effective way, taking off Bin Laden, disrupting, again, killing morale and all that, psychologically.
Yeah.
But then there's always a succession plan, and they plan ahead. You know, I always say the terrorist is a rational actor, despite his savagery. You know, because sometimes they think, oh, these guys are crazy. No, what they are doing is unacceptable, but they act rationally. When they see threat, they're able to avoid it. And I read somewhere that when you capture these extremists, the leaders are more likely to divulge information as fast as they can than the followers. You know, it has to do with a lot of psychological brainwashing and all that. Yeah, so they know, they have information, they know how things operate. Now, with the taking off of Bilal, it means that, and the follow-up means that the US is in for a long haul. They are ready to fight them. So they are going to be a little bit taken aback. I mean, on the back foot. Yes, in order to so we are going to see less strikes because they are going to now trying to reorganize themselves. It happened in 2012, 2013.
Yes,
when France used aerial force. These guys limited the attacks. They dispersed, and at the point they were almost like they were not there until they saw that things were becoming, and then they regrouped.
Yeah.
So yes, they have the capacity to regroup, but these strikes are very significant, and Nigeria needs this, and the coordination must continue.
Okay. Here's a hypothetical for you in terms of that aspect of rationalism. If I was then to say, I'm going to be deliberately captured, and this now comes back to the aspect of misinformation and disinformation. I will diverge stuff that is disinformation that gives you an upper hand. But anyway, that's a different conversation.
Okay.
It's just something I was thinking about.
True.
So now, if I was to shift gears and look at the aspect that behind many of the security crises that we're seeing right now are the aspects of hidden economies that basically move money, they move weapons, they move people, and protection as well.
Yes, sir.
All right. So you have studied illegal drug flows into West Africa, especially through Guinea-Bissau, right? Yeah. And on to Europe, right? How does that network actually operate?
Okay. So the drug fight in Americans has been very interesting.
Okay.
Various U.S. presidents, and we remember Reagan becoming more aggressive towards it. I mean, there's the approach has not really resolved anything.
Okay.
And the drug lords always find ways, or the kingpins always find ways to divert attention. So West Africa became a conducive diversion.
Yeah.
It's around this the Atlantic Rim, so to speak. So they just moved the drugs from Central America or Southern America all the way to that southwestern West Africa. And these countries, we have Guinea-Bissau, we have Guinea, we have Sierra Leone, we have Gambia and other countries there. I mean, Ghana is also there. We've had recent bust, very significant. Now, these guys then move to the shores of these countries and compromise border security.
Yes.
So then when these are compromised, then they find a way to ship these drugs to Europe. And then Europe will focus on what is coming out from Americans, while I mean the other guys use the West African route to get the drugs into Europe and all that. The problem, however, is that currently there is a growing market, domestic market.
Yes.
So it's not all the drugs that gets to West Africa that
are going to Europe.
Transit to Europe.
They're actually staying when...
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it destroying the youth and all that. And we have to pay attention. Now, the problem that people have is, it seems like some of them have political protection. Some of these drug laws have political protection. In Guinea-Bissau, it got to the summit recently when they said military officials and politicians have been compromised. And this Guinea-Bissau has some archipelago, the group of islands off coast, and which is not really protected. So these drugs just move their ships, boats just move there, offload it, and they find a way into mainland Guinea-Bissau and onwards to wherever they want to take it to. And it is alleged that military officers and top politicians have been compromised in this transportation of drugs. And this means that illicit financing. You can talk about this and talk about even terror financing,
right,
where terrorists are able to exploit gold that is abundant in West Africa to support their activities. They actually extort cattle in the form of zakat in West Africa.
Yeah.
And this brings in millions of dollars a yearly because, cattle. And then they also control strategic route. So there are international transport companies or local transport companies that pay for passage.
Yeah.
Because, business must run. And that in itself, it's problematic. How do we make sure that business run well? And we've mentioned the territory. Can you have convoys escorting all vehicles? It's almost impossible. So in the Sahel, we've seen this happen, and then a short while, fuel cost and all that, it's not that easy.
Exactly. Sorry, you mentioned gold. I've just had a thought. We know Ghana for Ghana. What everybody, when I first hear Ghana, when I went to Ghana to interview Kafur, one of the things we talked about was the aspect of Galamsey and the Chinese influence in terms of what it's doing to the environment, but why then that protection is also granted to the Chinese to allow to continue this kind of exploitation.
Okay. So, resource or extraction has been a major source of revenue for government in Ghana. The country was called Gold Coast.
Yes.
And first Europeans that came saw a lot of gold. And so that's what they named it. In West Africa, wherever the Europeans, whatever they saw in abundance, that was how they named it. So if you heard of Cote d'Ivoire, Ivory Coast,
Yep.
they had a lot of ivory. Somewhere Liberia, it's called Pepper Coast until the name changed. And we have that. Yeah. So you realize that now with that, then it means the country must survive. And so the extraction is going to be intensified. But over the years, we've dealt with huge corporations that extracted gold hugely and used the right processes. But we've always had an informal sector,
Right.
known as galamsey.
Yes.
From the word was corrupted from the phrase "gather them and sell." Gather them and sell. So it's artisanal mining.
Yeah.
And then they gather this gold and then they sell.
Okay.
And it was done very nicely because, it was manpower. You take it, you wash it, and you pick the gold and you sell. But then came machines usually from China. And when these machines came, the rivers, water bodies that produce potable water for the population has been destroyed. And over the years, government have made effort to correct this. But it's difficult because, it has to do with the who gets what, when, and how.
Yeah.
The locals, they said, well, this gold is for us. But these big companies come in and then we don't see much from them. So, well, if we have the machines, then we can also take more from the land. And fighting this has been difficult. And what happened is that we've had issues where some foreigners have been arrested, especially from China, who supported these activities because, they brought in this capital equipment, like, the machines, and then it led to more destruction and currently, on my way here, I saw one news where the largest natural lake in Ghana, Lake Bosonjo, is in Ashanti region. The satellite imagery shows that around it, we see so much of this galamsey happening.
Yeah.
And this illegal mining is really destroying. And that is lake. So if it gets destroyed, cleaning it is more difficult than cleaning rivers.
Yeah.
Even though now we've resorted to cleaning the rivers.
Yeah.
The current EPA boss, a young professor, very innovative, is doing well with that. Professor Kruji is doing very well. But then the situation is bigger because the illegal mining is still ongoing. It's destroying this water body. So hopefully something will be done to make the situation better. But then in the Sahel and other places, we also find this artisanal mining happening. And over there, the extremists decide to provide what they claim to be security for the locals against the government.
Yes.
And they take gold as payment.
Yep. Yeah.
And they sell this gold in coastal West Africa to raise money to finance it.
It's a vicious circle.
Yes.
It's a very vicious circle. Now, all good things must come to an end. But before we close, I want to look at the pressure points that the world tends to notice a bit too late. After the horse has bolted, people are like, we should have, etc. What is the world not paying enough attention to in Africa's security landscape that could become a major problem over the next year or two?
Yeah. So I always say that even though Bin Laden had launched his first attacks in Kenya and Dar es Salaam, that is Nairobi and Dar es Salaam, and basic bombings.
Yep.
And he had lived in Sudan before September 11. When September 11 happened, we saw it as remote. Africa saw it as remote. This is the radicals in Middle East having issues with America is not our problem.
Yeah.
Today, we have the epicenter of terrorism in Africa. So it means a problem anywhere is a problem everywhere. Because the world, it's one. So I like the way you started with how should the world see what is happening. Now, in what is happening in the Sahel is just a vegetation.
Yeah.
That is sandwiched by the Sahara and the savannah.
Yes.
Now, from you to move to North Africa from the Sahel is not far. People walk all the way. That migration issues. Maybe another time we will discuss that. Now, these extremists can reach Europe anytime. They can pretend to be migrating as well and get to Europe and form sleeper cells and strike when they can.
Political asylum as well.
That is it.
Seekers.
And then later attack.
Yeah.
So these issues are supposed to be tackled by all and sundry. It's not an African problem. It should be seen. As I mentioned, we saw terrorism to be a Middle East problem, and then it turned out
exactly.
So we have to look at it that way. The world should come together. So the US support is then in line with this, and then other countries, both East and West. When it comes to terrorism, the issues of geopolitical rivalry, great power politics should be limited.
Yes,
because they are indiscriminate. I mean, they attack any country. I mean, Russia, in the midst of fighting Ukraine, had terrorists attacking them, and at the time, even Ukraine condemned that because they don't discriminate.
Yeah,
they will fight you. They will maim people, kill people for ideological reasons that are not supported in mainstream politics of any country. This is not to say that we should not separate the moderates from the radicals and talk to the moderate.
Yeah.
But then we should see it as a bigger problem. And there's the drug menace. You can imagine Guinea-Bissau doesn't share border with any of the Sahel states. But you can imagine, I mean, extremists taking advantage of this drug treaty.
Yeah.
It happened. There was a Mokhtar Bel Mokhtar. He was the head of Akim, the former head of Akim. I think he's no more. I mean, he has been eliminated or something. He used the control of drugs, that is illicit tobacco and drugs in the Sahel to raise money at the time. So the terrorists will not shy away. You know that they make money from drugs.
Yeah.
They will make the money and sponsor them. And in recent times, I've said that I fear that West African extremists are sponsoring their mother organization in the Middle East. Because Al-Qaeda or ISIS in Syria doesn't have that much room to operate.
Yeah.
Like what ISIS affiliates have in West Africa. And the resources they control. Al-Qaeda affiliates, same way. They control cattle, they control land, they control transportation route. They can place an embargo on on Bamako.
Yeah.
It's not good.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to put a different hat on you right now.
Yes, sir.
Right? Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you were chairing the UN Security Council and looking at Africa, where would you direct urgent attention and resources to first?
Yeah, so I'll look at the Sahel,
Okay.
obviously.
Yeah.
Because this is a region that in 2000 we are going to have, or 2100, we are going to have a lot of insecurity, a lot of population. So, I mean, we have to tackle that. Then the Horn of Africa, Somalia, Ethiopia, and other places, and Sudan. That is the worst humanitarian crisis in the world currently. Sudan.
But nobody's talking about it.
I mean, when it started, they were talking about it.
Yeah.
Then other things started, and then they said, well, recently a country that was supposed to give arms to Sudan decided to change its mind. Why? Because they are facing their own problems in the Middle East.
Yeah.
So they are not going to get it. So Africa is always put at the back burner when things are not okay with other countries. But I think that if I was chairing the Security Council, I'll look at the Sahel, I'll look at the Horn of Africa, and I'll look at Central Africa.
Okay.
The DRC, because the Central Africa also has an ISIS affiliate, ADF.
Yes.
That is beheading people and causing so much mayhem. We have to look at these three regions. These are the most, since it's Sahel, the Horn of Africa, Central Africa. Yes, Cabo Delgado in Mozambique, we still find Al-Shabaab in Mozambique there, but it's not as bad as we see in Central Africa, West Africa, and the Horn of Africa.
Okay. Just to wrap things up very quickly. June 18th, June 23rd, June 28th.
Yeah.
Ghana versus Panama. Ghana versus England. Ghana versus Croatia. Your predictions?
Yeah.
The first one is against Panama on the 18th actually.
We are going to win all matches.
You're going to win all matches?
Yes.
Okay.
This is not to say that we are taking any of the teams for granted or we are just underestimating any of them. But yes, in recent times our matches have not been too encouraging, friendly matches. But I believe that Ghana has a way of surprising the world when
on the big stage.
Yes, I mean, yes, of course. So, because I mean the morale. I mean, it's a football nation. Yes, myself, I'm not so much of a football fan, but I mean, when Ghana is playing, we all watch. I mean, and we want to win. And so far, it's been good with the support, the grant of visas and everything. The United States is trying its best. Ghana Supporters Union, they are doing their best. But I believe that we are going to win against all these teams and then move to the next level.
Yeah, I like that confidence. Fidel, thank you so much for a very, very enlightening conversation. We need to have you back here soon. All right?
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right. Security language can make things sound cleaner than they are. We speak about insurgency, terrorism, coups, trafficking, regional blocs, foreign partners, and military operations. But beneath those terms are communities trying to survive in places where the state is sometimes distant, contested, feared, or simply absent. What North and West Africa show us is that insecurity does not stay neatly in one box. A local grievance can become a governance failure. A governance failure can attract armed groups. Armed groups can feed illicit economies. Illicit economies can draw in foreign interest. And before long, what began locally becomes regional. That is why military action alone cannot carry the whole burden. A drone strike may disrupt a network. An operation may clear a town. A partner may provide intelligence, training, or equipment, but if governance does not return, if justice does not follow, and if communities do not believe the state can protect them, the map remains exposed. For the wider region, the warning is already visible. Violence moves through borders. Trafficking moves through ports and corridors. Propaganda moves through phones. Coups move through political imagination. Distrust moves faster than institutions can repair themselves. The challenge then is not only how to defeat armed groups, it is how to rebuild authority, trust, and coordination that makes security possible in the first place. You've been listening to Panel 54, where we rethink the world one African perspective at a time. If it made you pause, reflect, or reframe, share it, start a conversation, and do tag us in. Find us on our social media handles at Panel54Pod and your favorite streaming platform, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Until next time, stay curious, stay grounded, and remember, keep the lens clear. Panel 54, a global perspective through an African lens.